Hi, my name is Montana, and I'm here to talk to you today about my response to an editorial written by the New York Times entitled "The Child's Visit to the Gun Range." They talked about an incident that occurred a couple weeks ago in Arizona, where a 9-year-old girl accidentally killed her firing range instructor in a freak accident. I'd frankly like to start off with a story first. Um, from the age of 15, I was at summer camp with my fellow scouts, and one of the scouts, his name, we'll call him Craig, and he was really excited to start practicing for his shooting merit badge, and he had hoped to earn his merit badge by the end of the week. So on his first day at the range, he was firing his gun, and at one point, when his gun did not fire, he turned around to ask for help, and in doing so, he accidentally pointed the gun at the firing range instructor. He was promptly kicked off the range for the entire week, and nobody was hurt, thankfully, but that just comes to show that shooting requires a lot of discipline and respect for the weapon and those who surround you. In the New York Times editorial, they talk about the accident that occurred in a really negative fashion. They really put down the people who were at the scene of the accident and the types of guns that they're allowed to use at the firing range. So, a little bit more about the accident that occurred. The 9-year-old girl, she had experienced firing guns with her family, and the Bulletin gun tour, they had successfully allowed many children of a similar age to fire a variety of firearms with no accidents. So, but whenever the child was firing an Uzi, the instructor, he stood behind her and to his left, knowing that Uzis, whenever fired, they tend to recoil upwards and to the right. And in a freak accident, when the child lost control of her weapon, the firing range instructor was struck several times, and he ended up dying the very next day. In the New York Times article where they react to the accident, they make a really strong claim against the idea of automatic weapons being wielded by children, and they do so through a lot of indirect and negative statements. I, for one, don't necessarily disagree that a 9-year-old should not be firing an automatic gun regardless. A child of that age very well might not lack the discipline, and they might not even have the physique to be wielding a gun like that. You wouldn't let a child use a chainsaw for the very same reason that you wouldn't let them use an automatic weapon. So, in the New York Times editorial, their indirect stance that is only derived through implied statements that they make, they alienate part of the audience that might be sensitive to gun control, and because of the negative language they use with the types of guns, it becomes very off-putting to anybody that they might have wanted to persuade that might not agree with them. Personally, I might not have ever thought about the topic again and just dismissed it if I hadn't been taking a deeper look at the article for a class. So if the New York Times editorial board had taken a more concrete stance and avoided some of the negative language that they use in the editorial, they very well might have been able to influence a large part of their audience. The first point I wanted to make is that throughout the article, they refer to automatic guns as lethal battlefield weapons and several other negative statements, and they imply poor decision making on both the parents of the child and the gun range owner. That's the main way that the editorial seeks to challenge the reader's opinions by stirring up these negative emotions. In the peer-reviewed journal article titled Discrete Emotions and Persuasion, the author states, because individuals use emotions as informational sources about their environment, that in turn that can shape their expectancies about the likelihoods of specific events mentioned in a persuasive message. So by using the language that they do in the article, they seek to give their readers ammunition to use in future discussions and arguments by swaying their emotions. But by doing so, those who might hold strong ideas about gun control, they'll probably just become agitated because they're not being appealed into a way that can convince them by only targeting their emotions. If the New York Times had instead provided a more logical argument with evidence, they might have persuaded more of their audience to a similar mindset. The second point I want to make is in another journal article titled "The Principles of Persuasion," Michael Watkins, he discusses one of the major methods of persuasion is by taking leadership. The editorial board, they haven't taken leadership in really any fashion, and instead they just choose to bring a negative light to the matter. If they had instead chosen to take a more concrete stand, they could have swayed more of their readers. And not that just simply bringing awareness is not an unworthy goal, but instead they just probably just for me, I was just irritated at first, and I've actually, after thinking about it, I've come around to support them. But so far, what we've established is that the New York Times article, the editorial, has alienated some of their audience by just choosing to talk about gun policy, by not taking an adamant stand on a possible course of action, and instead only seeking to challenge their views by throwing around harsh language in reference to automatic guns and the people that were using them. The New York Times had chosen to instead take a more concrete stance and talk about what they wanted to talk about in a more rational and emotionally muted tone. They could have convinced more people who might not have aligned with their views to begin with. Thank you.